Hey guys, it's Kevin in my review for Capone. So what Capone's essentially about is basically we center on, well, Al Capone, but more specifically towards the last few years of his life when his health really started to deteriorate due to syphilis, but also dementia, which really starts to give him all these weird sort of hallucinations and kind of his regrets over what he's done in the past and the exploration of what he went through, or at least I think that's what this is supposed to be about. But yeah, Capone. Honestly, this is one of those films that I really did not think was ever going to see the light of day. I've said this to so many people before. If we were not in quarantine right now, I don't know if Capone would have actually come out. I really did feel this was going to be one of those films that was kind of shelved. Not because it was terrible, but because Josh Trank does not have a good track record. Obviously, we all really love Chronicle a lot, but also everyone was pretty much, very heavily let down by Fantastic Four, Fan Four Stick, a film that really nobody tries to bring up now because of just how much of a colossal failure it was. So knowing that Josh Trank had this new film coming out, I just really didn't know if it was ever going to come out. I thought it was going to be shelved for a long time, but, now that we're in this situation, it seems like the perfect time for this film to come out, and I was actually pretty optimistic about it. I felt, you know what? Yes, Josh Trank definitely did fuck up with his previous movie, but maybe he can start off with a clean slate. I really was part of the conversation that Fantastic Four wasn't bad because of him, but because of the studio interference. So I was really willing to give him a second chance. I really like the cast in this movie, and I thought the premise was definitely very interesting. So I finally got around to watching it, and this movie is not very good. In fact, this film is kind of terrible. This is a very poorly made film that is generally very confusing at points, and really is one of those films where I'm just really struggling to see the actual point of it, but we're just getting to it right now. Now, right off the bat, the initial appeal to this film, obviously since it's not Josh Trank, is probably going to be the cast here, and I will say this right now. For a cast that is really stellar here, they, not all of them, but quite a few of them do definitely leave a lot to be desired, especially when it comes to our lead performance here, shockingly from Tom Hardy, who gives one of his most questionable performances I think I've ever seen from him. Because, yes, Tom Hardy is very much a character actor. He really sinks his teeth into the role. He really goes all in. But perhaps he went a little too all in here, because his portrayal of Al Capone is so over the top and so silly that I honestly found it pretty hilarious throughout, especially with the way he's going about this role. He will very often just slip into this ridiculous voice, and it's just very hard to take him seriously. But the problem is that's not at all what the movie is going for. It's clear that the film is not, at least I don't think, trying to make a mockery out of Capone, but that's entirely what Tom Hardy is doing, and it's one of those roles where it's just so baffling I couldn't help but laugh at it, especially because most of the movie he's just talking like this, and he's doing this the whole time. That's literally his voice throughout, like, the whole movie, and it's so funny. It's so funny to the point where I don't know what he's doing here, and I love Tom Hardy a lot. He's usually the best thing about every movie he's in, but this is the first time where I legitimately don't know what happened here. I don't know if he was just given bad direction. I don't know if he just really didn't know what to do with this role. I really don't understand it, but either way, he is horrible in this movie, and I never thought that I would say that, because I really do think Tom Hardy is one of our great actors right now. If, in terms of actors that I would put in the conversation for, like, best actors working today, I would definitely put Tom Hardy in that conversation, because I think he usually really delivers, but this performance really did fall flat in all the wrong ways. I found myself laughing at this film, at him more than anything, and obviously that was very much not the intent, and because of the fact that it's very hard to take Hardy seriously, and because so much of the film is so, squarely focused on him, it really did take me out of the movie very often, and I was very let down by this performance here. I honestly do feel he was pretty miscast in this movie. I think if you had an actor that had a little bit more of an idea of how to portray this role, I think it really could have worked out well. But Hardy, strangely here, just seemed like he had no idea what to do with this role, and as a result, it just comes off really comedic and very hard to take seriously overall. Now, I will say, the rest of the cast in this movie is actually pretty good. Linda Cardellini, Matt Dillon, Kyle MacLachlan, all these actors are doing a good job. It's just, unfortunately, they're not utilized in the way that they should be. I will say, out of the performances, I think Matt Dillon was probably the big standout. He has a lot of really good stuff in this movie. The dynamic he has with Tom Hardy, I thought was definitely really well done. But even at that, he's not really in the movie that much. Linda Cardellini, she's a great actress, and she does a great job for what she has in this movie. You understand that she's trying to deal with someone like Capone, or as they call him, Fonzie in this movie, that is increasingly erratic, that is having all of these weird sort of hallucinations, is having very severe dementia. She's really trying to grapple with all of that, and I thought she did a good job. Again, I just don't think the film really utilized these actors in the way that we want them to. A lot of great acting in this movie, but they don't stick out as much because of it, and that definitely does, I think, bring the film down for sure. But now let's get to the directing and the writing, because that's easily the biggest issue with this film. Josh Trank's directing in this movie is just very confusing, and look, I really want to root for him. I really want to root for Josh Trank. I really want to believe that he can make something great again, that Chronicle wasn't just a fluke. I want to believe that he does have the talent in him. I really just found myself having a very hard time how to feel about this movie. I don't understand the tone that he's going for. I think what he's going for is that he wants to present this as a very depressing and almost sort of horrific film about someone like Al Capone that is this very deadly and very notorious gangster, and kind of strip away some layers of him, show how regretful he is over what he did. And I think that is definitely a good idea, but the problem is the way he goes about it in this movie. It's very hard to tell how to feel in many scenes. There are scenes in this movie that legitimately feel like a self-parody. It really does feel like the film is making fun of Al Capone. It feels like the film is making fun of this situation, and I just really had a hard time latching onto what Trank was trying to do here. I'd really like to know what he was trying to do. I think there's definitely some ideas in there, but I think he just needed a lot more clarity. I think we needed to know more of what his actual vision is with this movie, because it's generally confusing here at points. And again, I don't know if I necessarily want to fault Trank, or if I just want to fault the fact that he just didn't spend enough time on it. I think anyway it's his fault, but I don't know if I want to spend so much time on this was a bad idea, because I do think this was a good idea, or it just wasn't, given as much, we weren't as clear as to how we should feel. And I think the main issue is, again, just we weren't really clear on what we're really supposed to feel here. And so because of that, I think the directing really does suffer here. But the writing is easily, I think, the biggest issue with this movie, because again, I want to reiterate, I really like the idea of this film. Essentially, what this film could have been is if you take the last act of The Irishman, where you have our main character really just thinking about every decision that he's made, every person that he's killed, every wrongdoing that he's done, was it really all worth it? I think that's what this story really could have been. The idea that Al Capone, someone who really is this monster of sorts, I really do think he could have leaned heavily into that, but unfortunately the film is almost completely devoid of a plot, other than Al Capone is just starting to lose his shit more and more throughout the movie, and it's just not a very compelling plot in that way. There isn't much of a story here to really keep you all that engaged in what's going on, and like I said, Hardy's, sort of monstrous performance where he's just the whole time, it's like, it's very hard to take that seriously. And there are even scenes with Al Capone where I generally do not know what he's trying to go for here. There is a legitimate scene where he is watching The Wizard of Oz, and he sees a scene of the Cowardly Lion, and, singing about how, he sees the scene of the Cowardly Lion singing, and, Tom Hardy starts to sing along as Al Capone, and which is hilarious because he's like, if I were a king of the forest, and it's like, what the fuck is happening? Like, what are you trying to do here? I don't know what the direction, I don't know what the idea was here. And so things like that just makes it very hard for me to latch onto. But then there are some ideas I generally really do like. There are some dream sequences here that I think are pretty well done, where you see Al Capone really kind of self-reflecting on things that he's done and self-reflecting on certain choices that he's made. The problem is the film has almost nothing to say about it other than he's just going to reflect on it, or oh, he's just going to do something. It doesn't really have a point in that way. And so after a while you're like, okay, well, why should I care? Because still at the end of the day, this guy doesn't seem to have that many regrets. This guy doesn't seem to have that many, doesn't seem to have that much commentary on what he's done. It doesn't seem like he's changing that much. I understand he's undergoing very severe dementia, but I really do feel there was a way to go about this where you could really show how this is affecting him. Have it be that he is finally realizing, what he's done wrong when it's too late. I think that would have been a really good idea, but that's not what they're going for here. What they're going for here, I just really had a hard time figuring out. And again, it's just very hard to tell what's going on. And like I said before, the concept for this film, I think, is really fucking good. I want to reiterate that. I like the concept here a lot. Hell, it basically sounds like the last act of The Irishman. The difference is, The Irishman took a lot of time to get you to see a lot of what, Frank Sheeran did in that time. The wrongdoings, the way he isolated his family, how he was involved with all these crimes. It really took the time to let you see that. And then once everything's been stripped away for him, to him really reflect on the idea of, was it all worth it? Capone, on the other hand, has no idea what angle it wants to approach that from. It's a very thinly sketched idea, and that's what really bothers me about it. Yes, we obviously know just how monstrous and just how just how terrible of an individual Al Capone really was. All the terrible shit that he did back in the day. But the problem is, because of the way he's being portrayed in this movie, we have no context behind any of the hallucinations that he's having, any of the revelations he's having. There's just nothing concrete there. It all just feels very fragmented. And again, I know Josh Trank keeps saying that this was intentional, but I really do feel that hurts the movie because it loses some sort of meaning. It loses the message. What is the film really trying to say? I feel like that's completely stripped bare from the simple fact that they didn't want to do really anything with the story. They wanted to tell a very bare bones narrative, and considering how much you can do with this idea from someone like Al Capone, dissecting someone that is this gangster of sorts, that did kill a lot of people. The film doesn't really want to do that. It doesn't really put the care that I think it really needed into that, and I think that's what really brings this down for me. And there's also just a lot of subplots that happen in this movie that you think are going to amount to something, but they really don't. Like, there's this whole subplot in the movie where there's this money that Capone supposedly hid away, and there are these group of people that are trying to find it. They're trying to track it down. That amounts to absolutely nothing. It doesn't go anywhere. They don't do anything interesting with it. It's just another thread that they have in this movie. Then they kind of try to tie it into this idea of Capone, again, having this, fear of this, again, this loss of power, this loss of agency, something that he's had all these years and something that he doesn't have anymore. They really don't do much with that. You see his family sort of reflecting on what's going on, but we don't really get that deep of a dive into it because, again, we're just so focused on Capone. We're viewing things through his eyes, so it's very disorienting in that way. And I know some people have said that maybe that was deliberate, but I just don't think that's very good storytelling. If the point of this movie is to be generally confusing and generally disorienting, well, then I don't think that's a very compelling story either, because still it doesn't give me an idea of what you're really trying to go for here. I don't really come away, there isn't a lot that I come away from when it comes to this movie. I don't come away from it thinking, wow, I learned a lot about Al Capone. Wow, that really made me think a lot. Wow, that's a really insightful look at, what he's really going through here. I just don't really think it was at all. I think there were things that they could have done, but there's just a lot of things that just don't make a lot of sense to me. The most egregious of which is this subplot of sorts that they add in regarding this one character who throughout the movie seems very clearly real, to the point where he has, this character as a whole introduction and everything. It seems legitimate. But then they try to do this thing towards the end of the movie where, oh, maybe this character wasn't real. Maybe he was made up. Maybe he was a complete figment of Capone's imagination. And it's like, what the hell are you trying to say here? How does that make any sense with what you've shown before? How does that tie into it? It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't work. And it's one of those things where the film is already not working, so that's just an extra thing that really just doesn't make this work at all, and I think that's what really does bring it down for sure. So again, in terms of a story, it's just not very compelling because there just isn't much of one here. There are morsels of a story. There are some elements of a story, but there isn't a cohesive story, and I think that's what really brings this film down for sure. I will say, cinematography-wise, I don't think this film is that bad. Some of the dream sequences, I think, are actually really well done. They definitely do give you a sense of eeriness. They're definitely very horrific in that way. There's one, the problem is, again, any time that I felt some sort of tension, here comes Tom Hardy being like, oh no, what are you doing? Oh no. It's like, how can I take that seriously? And that's my problem with this movie. Anytime I was locked into it, you got Tom Hardy in there just being a full-on monster and just being so over the top to the point where I couldn't do anything but laugh. But I also can't say the movie is a full-on guilty pleasure because it's very frustrating and there are ideas that I do really like, and the cinematography is another thing that is disrupted because of that. I don't think the makeup either is that great either. I think it definitely does look very fake. It just isn't very convincing on Capone, and I've never really liked the makeup very much at all. Maybe they should have done some overaging, I'm not really sure, but I felt like they should have done something else in terms of the makeup because it just wasn't really working here at all. There's also this shootout scene that is really not that well filmed. I feel like it should have been it should have been way better filmed than it was, especially because the film has a severe lack of action. If you're looking for a lot of like mobster type scenes, there really aren't that many in this movie, and considering they tried to go all out with this shootout scene, really wasn't that impressive at all. I don't think they handled that very well. The score here I didn't think was too bad. It definitely gave you the sense of what they were trying to go for here, but even that at points was kind of confusing. And the editing, I think this film is really not well edited at all. And again, I've heard some people say the film is deliberately edited to, to sort of take you out of it. It's meant to feel alienating, but I just don't think that was the right choice for this movie. I think it should have been a little bit more clear. I think it should have been a little more concrete because, again, Hardy's performance is not telling me anything other than look how bad he is in this role. Oh my god, he's so funny. That's all I'm really getting out of it. I'm not getting a sense of I'm not getting the sense of a man that is in deep regret. I'm not getting a sense of a man that is, trying to sort of grapple on what he's done, sort of reflect on what he's done. I'm not really getting that. What I'm getting at is an old man that has dementia and literally is shitting himself in one scene and is dressing up in women's clothing, but I'm not really getting much of a story here. I just feel the film was very choppy, especially in the third act, where I legitimately had no idea what was going on. I have a friend that watched this like a week ago, and I texted him like, dude, what the fuck was up with that ending? And he still does not have an answer as to what any of it meant. And so that's when you know, like, it's just not very good storytelling. I'm a firm believer in if something needs to be ambiguous, then leave it ambiguous, but I don't think that ambiguity helps the movie at all. If anything, I think it really trumps it. I think it really trumps it of making an impact. I think it really trumps it of being something that actually stuck with me, doing something different, showing me a different layer of Al Capone. All they did here was make a mockery out of him, and I don't think at all that was the intent. It was definitely funny. It was definitely entertaining. I think Tom Hardy definitely showed a side of himself that I didn't know he was capable of. I didn't know that he could be this silly. I didn't know that he could be this terrible. But other than that, there just really isn't that much to recommend here. I think overall, this is a film that was just a huge train wreck. I think there were so many things that could have worked, and I think there were things that Trank really could have dived deeper into, but it just doesn't really feel like he wanted to do that. It feels lazy. It feels like a film that is very half-assed in that way. It has some ideas that I do very much admire. It has some things that I do think could be very interesting, but it just isn't dived into in a way that is compelling. It's not done in a way that really gets you to understand what they're going for. It's just done in a very haphazard, very clumsily handled, and just overall very boring way. The film is definitely very boring. It doesn't really do a lot. It does have a really hammy performance from Tom Hardy, but other than that, there just really isn't a lot that I'm going to remember from this. Unfortunately, this film really didn't do much of anything for me, so I am going to give Capone overall a D+. Over, guys, in my review of Capone. Let me know what you guys saw this movie, altered your thoughts on it. We'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.